I was 11 when my father vanished. No warning, no goodbye, just a note on the kitchen counter that said, "You'll be fine, Hannah." I wasn't fine. I cried until my voice broke, sitting in an empty house that smelled of dust and broken promises. Then, just before midnight, headlights flashed outside. A black Rolls-Royce stopped at our gate, and a tall man stepped out, silver hair, sharp eyes, and a presence that made the air itself hold its breath. "You're Hannah Parker?" he asked. I nodded, trembling. "Good. I'm your grandfather. Pack your things. You're coming home." That was the night I left behind poverty, pain, and every memory of my father. 18 years later, I'd built an empire on the foundation of his abandonment, and when he finally came back to take what he thought was his, I made sure he left with nothing. I still remember that Friday like a scar that never faded. The air smelled of rain and pine, and I ran home from school holding a spelling test with a perfect score. I wanted to show Dad. He'd promised that if I got an A, we'd go to the fair this weekend. I even imagined him smiling, ruffling my hair, saying, "That's my girl." But when I opened the door, the house answered with silence. The TV was gone, the cupboards half empty, the photo of Mom on the shelf missing. "Dad?" I called out, dropping my backpack. Only the echo of my voice came back. Then I saw it, a folded note on the kitchen counter, beside an unpaid electricity bill and a chipped coffee mug. "Hannah, I can't do this anymore. You'll be fine, Dad." That was it. No reason, no promise. Just words that cut deeper than a knife. I sat on the cold floor for hours, staring at the door, waiting for him to come back. Maybe it was a joke. Maybe he just needed air. But as the sunlight faded, hope dissolved into fear. The house creaked with loneliness. The fridge hummed like it was mocking me inside, just a bottle of ketchup and half a loaf of bread. I ate in silence, pretending it was dinner. When night came, I curled under a thin blanket, hugging my backpack like it could protect me from everything that hurt. Every sound made me flinch. The wind, the pipes, the scratching branches outside. I whispered to myself, "He'll come back. He has to." But deep down, I knew the truth. By morning, the silence was heavier. I walked to the small store down the street and stared at the breakfast sandwiches I couldn't afford. The clerk looked at me with pity. "Where's your dad, sweetheart?" I forced a smile. "He's working." It was a lie I'd tell for years. That night, when the rain began to fall, I sat by the window, tracing the raindrops with my finger. My heart hurt in a way I didn't have words for. That's when the headlights appeared outside, slicing through the darkness. A sleek black Rolls-Royce stopped in front of our sagging porch. The engine went quiet. A tall man stepped out, his figure framed by the streetlight. He wore a dark coat, polished shoes, and a look that didn't belong in my world. "Hannah Parker?" he asked, voice deep and calm. I hesitated. "Who are you?" He studied me for a long moment before saying, "Richard Whitmore, your grandfather." I froze. I'd never met him, only heard Dad call him that stubborn old man. "Hevs," Mater said. He stepped closer. "Pack your things, child. You're coming with me." And just like that, the life I knew, the loneliness, the hunger, the waiting ended with the click of a car door. I didn't know it then, but that night was the beginning of everything. My salvation, my education, and eventually, my revenge. The drive felt endless. I sat in the back seat of the Rolls-Royce, watching raindrops chase each other down the tinted window. The city lights blurred into ribbons of gold and gray. My hands clutched my backpack, the only piece of my old life I had left. Grandpa didn't speak for most of the ride. He sat across from me, reading something on his tablet, his silver hair catching every flash of passing headlights. Only once did he glance up and say quietly, "You're safe now, Hannah. Safe." The word felt foreign. When the car turned off the main road, the gate ahead loomed like something from another world. Whitmore Estate, spelled in wrought iron letters. The mansion behind it looked like a castle lost in time. Marble pillars, ivy-covered walls, and windows glowing with warm golden light. As the car rolled up the driveway, two women stepped out from the grand front doors. One was tall, elegant, and sharply dressed, my Aunt Margaret. The other, a girl around my age with perfect curls and a smirk, her daughter Lydia. Margaret's smile froze the moment she saw me. "Father," she said, her tone brittle. "You brought her?" "She's my granddaughter," Grandpa replied evenly. And she'll stay here from now on. Lydia whispered something and laughed. Margaret's face tightened. She doesn't belong in this house. She's Daniel's problem. Daniel is gone, Grandpa said sharply. And I won't have my family divided any further. Margaret looked away, lips pressed thin. Fine, but don't expect me to play babysitter. She turned, heels clicking across the marble floor, the echo ringing in my ears long after she disappeared. Grandpa sighed, then turned to me. Don't mind her. This house has more pride than warmth. He led me inside. The chandelier above glittered like 1,000 tiny suns. The hallways smelled of polished wood and old money. Paintings of stern ancestors lined the walls, each one looking like they were judging me. A maid showed me to a room on the second floor, bigger than my entire old house. A canopy bed, silk curtains, a fireplace that flickered gently. On the nightstand sat a framed photo of a little boy and an older man, Grandpa and my father, long ago. I stood there staring at it, heart tightening. Why didn't he ever tell me about you? I asked softly. Grandpa stepped into the doorway. Because your father and I disagreed on everything, especially how to raise a child. Did you ever love him? I asked. His expression faltered for a second. Yes. But sometimes love isn't enough to fix what's broken. He left, the heavy door clicking shut behind him. That night I lay awake in the vast bed, staring at the ceiling carved with gold leaves. The silence pressed in from every direction, not peaceful, but suffocating. I heard faint laughter from down the hall, Lydia's, sharp and cruel. Somewhere in this mansion, I realized, wealth didn't mean happiness. It just made the loneliness echo louder. I turned to the window. Beyond the glass, the ocean stretched endlessly, waves crashing against the cliffs below. Grandpa had said I was safe, but as I listened to the storm outside, I couldn't help but wonder if I had simply traded one kind of cage for another. The first morning at Whitmore Estate began before sunrise. A knock on my door jolted me awake. When I opened it, Grandpa stood there, already dressed in a crisp suit, holding 2 cups of coffee. We start early in this house, he said. Breakfast is in 15 minutes. Wear something practical. Practical. I didn't even know what that meant in a mansion like this. Downstairs, the dining room looked like something out of a royal palace. The long table could have seated 30 people, but only 5 chairs were filled. Grandpa at the head, Aunt Margaret on his right, Lydia scrolling through her phone, and her twin brother Cole, who looked bored out of his mind. When I sat down, Margaret's smile was all ice. Sleep well, dear? She asked. Yes, thank you. Good. You'll need rest if you plan to keep up with Father's expectations. Grandpa shot her a look. Margaret. She went silent. He turned to me. After breakfast, you'll join me in the study. Time to learn what it means to be a Whitmore. I wasn't sure if it was an invitation or a warning. The study smelled of old leather and cedar. Sunlight poured across bookshelves stacked with finance ledgers, business manuals, and framed newspaper articles about Whitmore Holdings. Grandpa gestured to a chair. Do you know what we do, Hannah? Construction? Real estate? That's what people see, he said. What we really do is build legacies brick by brick, deal by deal, and that requires discipline. He handed me a thick folder filled with numbers and market reports. Start by finding which of these companies will fail within a year. I blinked. I don't know how to, then learn. The world won't slow down to wait for you. That became our daily routine. Mornings with financial reports, afternoons shadowing his meetings, evenings filled with notes and coffee that tasted like ambition. At first, I hated it. The pressure, the silence, the way Margaret's whispers followed me through the halls. She's playing student now, she told a guest one night. But she'll never be one of us. I heard it all, and I remembered every word. Still, Grandpa saw something in me that no one else did. When I solved a cost analysis problem, he nodded approvingly. You think with instinct. That's rare. I felt warmth spread through me. Not the warmth of comfort, but recognition. For once, I wasn't invisible. One evening, after a particularly long lesson about stock mergers, I finally asked, why me? You have your own children, your own heirs. Grandpa set down his pen and studied me quietly. Because you've known pain. People who've suffered don't waste opportunities. They fight for them. Then, his expression softened. And because you remind me of someone I once was, before wealth turned my children into strangers. His words stayed with me. Over the next few years, I changed. I stopped flinching when Lydia mocked me for studying instead of partying. I learned to negotiate with men twice my age. And every time I walked into the boardroom beside Grandpa, people noticed. They didn't see an abandoned girl anymore. They saw Hannah Whitmore sharp, confident, dangerous in silence. But success has a price. The more I grew into his world, the more resentment burned around me. Margaret saw it. Lydia hated it. Cole mocked it. And behind every polite smile at family dinners, I could feel it, the quiet war brewing under crystal chandeliers. The morning Grandpa died, the mansion felt hollow. The halls that once echoed with his deep, commanding voice were now filled only with the quiet shuffle of servants and the muffled sobs of strangers. He passed away in his sleep peaceful, they said. But when I stood beside his bed, the oxygen tube still coiled near the pillow, I couldn't stop shaking. The man who'd rebuilt me from nothing was gone. At the funeral, the Whitmore name drew the press like vultures. Rows of black suits, glossy limousines, and cameras flashing outside the church gates. Reporters whispered as I walked past, "That's the granddaughter, the one he raised." Aunt Margaret arrived late, draped in designer black, sunglasses hiding her eyes. Lydia and Cole followed, pretending to mourn while taking photos by the floral displays. When the priest began to speak, my throat closed. "Richard Whitmore was a man of great vision," he said. "No," I whispered under my breath. "He was more than that. He was my family." After the ceremony, the family gathered at the estate for the will reading. The lawyer, a thin man with silver-rimmed glasses, sat behind Grandpa's mahogany desk. The atmosphere was so thick with tension you could almost hear it hum. He cleared his throat. "Per the last will and testament of Mr. Richard Whitmore." Margaret leaned back in her chair, confidence dripping from her voice. "Let's just get this over with. I'm sure Father left things as they should be." The lawyer nodded, unfolding the document. "To my daughter, Margaret Whitmore, I leave the summer villa in Napa Valley. To my grandchildren Lydia and Cole, a trust fund of $2 million each." Margaret smiled smugly. "And the rest?" The lawyer adjusted his glasses. "The controlling shares of Whitmore Holdings, the primary estate, and the family trust are to be transferred to my granddaughter, Hannah Parker." The room went dead silent. "What?" Margaret's voice cracked. "That's absurd. She's a child." "I'm 23, I said quietly. "This has to be a mistake," Lydia hissed. "Grandfather wouldn't leave everything to her." But the lawyer continued calmly. "Mr. Whitmore made this decision 2 years ago, while in perfect health and of sound mind." Margaret shot to her feet, face red. "He was manipulated. You used him, didn't you?" I met her eyes. "I didn't have to. He saw through all of you." She slammed her hand on the table. "You'll regret this, girl. This company belongs to me." The lawyer closed the folder. "I'm afraid, Mrs. Whitmore, that's no longer true." She stormed out, Lydia trailing behind, tears smudging her mascara. Cole lingered a moment longer, glaring. "You think this makes you one of us?" he sneered. "No," I said. "It makes me exactly what he wanted me to be, a Whitmore who doesn't need the rest of you." Stated it naughty. That night, I stood alone on the balcony of the mansion overlooking the Pacific. The wind carried the faint scent of cedar and salt, Grandpa's favorite. In my hand was the gold pocket watch he'd given me when I turned 18. Engraved inside were the words, "Integrity builds empires." I whispered into the night, "I'll protect everything you built, Grandpa, and I'll make sure they never destroy it again." But beneath the calm of my vow, I felt it, the storm brewing on the horizon. Margaret would never forgive this. And the war for the Whitmore legacy had just begun. 6 months after the funeral, I had memorized every corner of the Whitmore empire. I worked late into the night, reading reports by lamplight while the rest of the family pretended to mourn. I was determined to prove I wasn't just a name on a will. I was the legacy itself. But power attracts vultures. Margaret had gone quiet since the will reading, which was more dangerous than her shouting. And then one cold Monday morning, I found out why. The boardroom on the top floor of Whitmore Holdings was a cathedral of glass and power-long table, skyline view, portraits of past chairmen watching over us. I walked in early, confident, briefcase in hand, but something was off. Half the directors avoided my gaze. My chair at the head of the table, Grandpa's chair, had been moved. Margaret sat there, in my seat. She wore a pearl gray suit and a smirk that could cut steel. "Good morning, Hannah," she said sweetly. We were just discussing the company's future. Without me? I asked. Oh, we assumed you were. Stepping aside. For the good of the shareholders, of course. She slid a folder across the table, an official motion of leadership restructuring. My name was listed as temporarily suspended due to incompetence and emotional instability. I felt my blood go cold. This is a joke. It's a vote, she corrected. And we've already taken it. She looked around the table. All in favor? Hands rose one by one. I stared at them. Men who'd shaken my hand, toasted my vision, smiled to my face. Every one of them betrayed me. On me? Margaret stood. Effective immediately. I'll be assuming control. You can hand over your keycard and office files. She thought she'd won. But she'd underestimated the one thing Grandpa had taught me best: preparation. I opened my briefcase and pulled out a sealed envelope stamped with a gold Whitmore crest. Actually, Aunt Margaret, I said calmly, Grandpa anticipated something like this. She frowned. What nonsense are you? I handed the document to the company lawyer, seated at the far end of the table. He adjusted his glasses, scanned it, and his eyes widened. According to this amendment, he said slowly, Mr. Richard Whitmore restructured the company charter 1 month before his passing. All board decisions required joint signature approval between the chair and the founder's appointed successor, which is Miss Hannah Whitmore. The room fell silent. Margaret's smile cracked. You're lying. Check the registry, I said, folding my arms. It's filed with the State Corporate Bureau. The lawyer nodded. It's valid. I leaned forward. So, unless I sign it, this little coup of yours doesn't exist. I'm on it. Margaret's voice trembled. You manipulative brat. You don't deserve this company. And you don't deserve Grandpa's name, I shot back. You buried him with fake tears and came here plotting the next day. She lunged across the table, but security guards stepped in, men I had hired weeks ago when I saw the signs. Escort Mrs. Whitmore off the premises, I said quietly. Margaret screamed as they took her by the arms. You'll regret this, Hannah. You think this is over? I watched her go, my heart pounding but my face still. When the door slammed shut, the room was silent except for the hum of the city below. That evening, I stood alone in the boardroom, the skyline reflected in the glass walls like 100 shattered mirrors. The sun was setting over San Francisco, painting the sky gold, the same color as Grandpa's pocket watch. I placed my hand on the chair, his chair, and whispered, I did it, Grandpa. I protected what's ours. But the victory felt hollow. Because behind every triumph was a truth I couldn't escape. No win in this family ever came without blood. And as I looked out at the city, a knock sounded on the boardroom door. My assistant, Ella, peeked in. Miss Whitmore, there's someone here to see you. Who? A man. He says he's your father. I froze. For the first time in years, the air in my lungs turned to ice. That night I would face the ghost that started it all. And no amount of wealth or power could prepare me for what he was about to say. He stood in the doorway of my office, smaller than I remembered, but still wearing the same beaten leather jacket from my childhood. The man who'd once walked out of my life without a goodbye. Hannah, he said softly, voice shaking. Don't. My tone was ice. You lost the right to say my name 18 years ago. He took a hesitant step forward. His hair was mostly gray now, his face tired, weathered. You look just like your mother, he whispered. I folded my arms. You mean the woman you forgot to mention before you disappeared? He flinched. I didn't know how to raise you alone. After she died, I fell apart. So you left an 11-year-old alone in a house with a note? That's not falling apart, Dad. That's abandoning. He looked at the floor. For a moment, silence filled the room except for the faint hum of the city below. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled photo me. At 6 years old, missing a front tooth, sitting on his shoulders. I kept this, he said. Every day. I know it doesn't mean much, but I never stopped thinking about you. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to stay still. Thinking about me didn't feed me, I said quietly. Didn't stop me from crying myself to sleep in an empty house. He nodded slowly. You're right. I deserve your anger. But Margaret told me you're trying to take the company away from the family. That's not what your grandfather wanted. The words hit like a slap. Margaret sent you? He hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything. I laughed bitterly. Of course. You didn't come here to make peace. You came because she needed a pawn. No, Hannah, it's not like that. I slammed my hands on the desk. It's exactly like that. You left me to starve, and now that I have something worth stealing, you show up waving her lies like a flag of love. He flinched again, eyes wet. I just wanted to see you, to say I'm sorry. I stared at him for a long moment. There was no hate left, only emptiness, like staring at the ghost of a life that never was. You know what's funny? I said quietly. I used to imagine this moment every night. I thought if you ever came back, I'd run to you, that I'd forgive you. But now, I just feel nothing. He looked broken. Please, he said, voice cracking. I'm sick, Hannah. The doctors say I don't have long. I didn't come for money. I just wanted my daughter to know I'm sorry before it's too late. Nod. For a second, my heart wavered. The child in me, the one who used to wait by the window, wanted to believe him. But then I saw the envelope in his pocket, peeking out just enough for me to notice a letterhead. Summit Development Group. Margaret's company. My voice went cold again. You can tell Margaret her plan failed, I said, standing. And if you ever walk into this building again, security will escort you out. He looked at me, eyes glistening. I know you hate me, but someday you'll understand. I shook my head. No, Dad. Someday you'll understand what it feels like to be left behind. He turned slowly and walked out, shoulders slumped. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like the final period on a chapter 18 years too long. I stood there for a long time, staring at the skyline. For years I'd wanted him back, wanted closure, love, something. Now I realized I didn't need any of it. I had built my own strength, my own name, my own future. And yet, as I watched the city lights flicker, a single tear fell. Not for him, but for the girl who'd once waited by the window, believing fathers always came home. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine, sat at Grandpa's desk, and whispered, "You were right, Grandpa. Some people teach you how to build, others teach you what never to become." The next morning, I made a decision: if the Whitmores wanted a war, I'd give them one. But this time, I'd make sure they could never rise again. After my father's visit, I didn't sleep for 3 nights. Every word he'd said replayed in my mind, the guilt, the excuses, the cracks in his voice. But the envelope from Summit Development Group told me what I needed to know. Margaret was desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. So I waited. Quietly. Weeks passed. On the surface, Whitmore Holdings thrived, profits up, new projects announced. But behind closed doors, I had Ella dig through every transaction Margaret ever touched before her removal. The deeper we looked, the uglier it got. Shell accounts, hidden kickbacks, payments routed through front companies in her children's names. It wasn't just greed. It was treason. I knew what Grandpa would have done. He wouldn't scream. He'd wait. Then he'd strike once, clean and final. So that's what I did? The annual shareholder meeting arrived, a glittering event at the downtown Hilton Ballroom, with every reporter in San Francisco waiting for a headline. I walked in wearing black silk, hair pinned back, calm as glass. Ella whispered beside me. "Are you sure about this, Hannah?" "Absolutely," I said. "It's time they saw who really built this empire." Anyway, Margaret was there, of course, sitting near the front with Lydia and Cole, pretending confidence. Her pearls glimmered under the chandelier, but her eyes flicked nervously between me and the giant projection screen behind the stage. I stepped up to the podium. "Good evening," I began, my voice steady. "Today we celebrate Whitmore Holdings, but also the integrity it stands for. And integrity, as my grandfather used to say, is tested only when greed whispers." A low murmur swept through the crowd. I pressed a button on the remote. Behind me, the first slide appeared, a company logo none of them recognized. Cedar Financial Group. Then another. Westline Logistics. "These," I continued, "are shell companies. Fake entities created to siphon millions from Whitmore Holdings. And they all lead back to one name." The next slide hit like a thunderclap. Margaret Whitmore. Gasps filled the room. Cameras flashed. Lydia turned pale. Cole swore under his breath. "That's a lie," Margaret shouted, standing. "You fabricated this." I nodded to Ella, who played a recording, Margaret's own voice, taken from an intercepted call. "Transfer another $2 million to Westline and make sure Hannah never finds out." The ballroom erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Security stepped forward. I raised a hand. Let her speak, I said calmly. Margaret trembled, her voice cracking. This company was mine. Father stole it from me, and you manipulated him. I stepped closer. I didn't manipulate anyone, Aunt Margaret. I earned what you threw away. Grandpa believed in people who built, not those who leech. And had a tabi of no talas. Avian other problems enter and subscribe. She stared at me, eyes wide, voice breaking. You think you've won? I leaned in, low enough for only her to hear. I don't think it. I know it. Then I turned back to the microphone. Effective immediately, Margaret Whitmore and her associates are terminated and under criminal investigation for corporate fraud. The evidence has already been turned over to the authorities. The audience exploded into applause. Reporters shouted. Lydia screamed, "You ruined us." No, I said softly. You ruined yourselves. Hours later, when the ballroom had emptied and the flashbulbs had faded, I stood on the balcony overlooking the city lights. The wind whipped my hair, but I didn't move. Ella came up beside me, a faint smile on her face. You did it. You actually did it. I looked out at the skyline the city Grandpa had helped build, the company he'd trusted me to protect. No, I said. We did it. For him. Below us, the night glittered not with greed, but with freedom. For the first time in years, I felt the weight lift from my chest. The ghosts of the past, my father, my aunt, the fear of never being enough all faded into the wind. I'd thought victory would feel cold, but instead, it felt like peace. Still, a quiet ache lingered not for what I'd gained, but for what I'd lost long ago. The family that could have been. I whispered into the night, Grandpa, it's over. The Whitmore name is clean again. But the wind seemed to answer softly, not over, Hannah, not yet. Because I didn't know then the world wasn't done testing me. The empire I'd saved would soon demand something greater, the courage to turn power into purpose. 6 months after the scandal, the Whitmore name no longer stood for greed, it stood for rebuilding. Every morning, the headlines felt like sunlight instead of a storm. Hannah Whitmore reshapes empire into force for good. From abandoned child to visionary CEO, but it wasn't the applause I cared about. It was what came next. I converted one of the downtown towers into something new. The Whitmore Foundation for Children. A place where no kid would ever feel the emptiness I once did. The lobby smelled of fresh paint and possibility. The walls covered in drawings from children who had already begun to dream again. At the opening ceremony, cameras flashed, and reporters shoved microphones in my face. Miss Whitmore, why start a foundation instead of expanding your real estate division? I smiled. Because buildings last decades, I said. But people, if you build them right, last generations. The crowd applauded, but I barely heard them. My eyes drifted to the photo framed on the stage. Grandpa Richard, standing beside me the day I graduated. He wasn't there in body, but I could almost hear his voice. Integrity builds empires, Hannah, I whispered back, and kindness keeps them standing. After the event, as the guests filtered out, I walked through the quiet halls alone. A little girl with pigtails tugged my sleeve. Miss Hannah, are you really a billionaire? I laughed softly. That's what the papers say. Then why are you helping kids like me? I knelt to her height. Because once, I was one of you. Her smile was the kind of thank you no press release could ever give. A few weeks later, I drove up the coast to visit Grandpa's grave, a simple marble stone overlooking the Pacific. The sea breeze tasted like memory. I placed a single white rose and the gold pocket watch beside his name. We did it, I whispered. They tried to destroy what you built, but it's stronger than ever. For a moment I swore I felt the warmth of a hand on my shoulder, the quiet approval of the man who had saved me from the dark. When I turned, no one was there. Only the ocean stretching into forever. That night, back at the mansion, Ella joined me on the balcony with 2 glasses of wine. You know, she said, you could finally take a break. Maybe write a book or, I don't know, fall in love? I laughed. A book maybe. Love. I looked at the stars. That's still under negotiation. She nudged me gently. You deserve happiness, Hannah. Maybe happiness isn't something you chase, I said softly. Maybe it's something you build one good choice at a time. The waves crashed far below, and for the first time, the sound didn't remind me of loneliness. It reminded me of rhythm of life still moving forward. A month later, an envelope arrived. No return address, just my name in shaky handwriting. Inside was a short note. I'm sorry again. I'm proud of you. Dad. No signature, no address. Just that. I sat there for a long time, staring at the words, and instead of anger, I felt release. He'd taken so much from me, my childhood, my trust, but I finally realized he couldn't take my peace. I folded the note and placed it in the same drawer as Grandpa's watch. Then I whispered, "Goodbye," and meant it. Today, when I walk through the halls of Whitmore Holdings, employees don't look at me as the girl who inherited everything. They see the woman who earned it, the one who turned pain into purpose. And every time I see a new project rise from the ground, I remember that 11-year-old girl sitting on the kitchen floor, staring at a note that said, "You'll be fine." She was more than fine, because she built her own empire not of glass and steel, but of hope, integrity, and compassion. When people ask how I did it, I always give the same answer: by never letting the past define who I could become. Now, when the sun sets over the Whitmore estate and the ocean turns gold, I lift my glass to the horizon and whisper, "This is for you, Grandpa, and for every lost child who never stopped believing there was more." And somewhere in the wind, I swear, I can still hear him smile.